go ahead and, okay. So we were supposed to watch the video regarding our topic. Just real quick, I can't remember who was
the childhood trauma.
Yes, the child trauma by, you have the lady's name.
Nadine Burke-Harris.
There it is.
There we go. Okay, I could not find it. She's a pediatrician. You know that. So pretty interesting. What is everyone's thoughts so far on just the video? Just after watching it, what's the first thing that kind of comes to mind, I guess?
I mean, I think, so I have notes up on like a secondary screen. So if I'm looking off, that's where I am. I thought it was striking, like the statistics she gave for the ACEs, like testing, or I don't know what to call it, where like 67% of the population that was researched had at least one ACE characteristic. And then 12% had 4 or more ACEs, which I just think that is like astounding. Like not so much like one ACE, because I mean, I think unfortunately quite a few of those things are pretty common, especially when you start factoring in like divorce or parent separation. But then like to even know that like 12% had at like 4 or more of them. And then when you start relating that to kids, and like especially younger kids that like are still learning how to like emotionally regulate and just be a person, like that is really crazy. And coming from like a school counselor side of things, I mean, that also is like really alarming, I think. Just because it really brings into perspective, like school counselors are focused on academic, social, emotional, and like career or post-secondary, like that, those are our focuses. And then just knowing these statistics is like, you can see how if someone has 4 or more of these like ACE characteristics, how that would affect their academics and their social emotional like experiences, and how it all like ties together. And then just knowing too how she was saying like the more ACEs somebody has, like the more like health risks they have, you know, for like heart disease and, you know, like early death. I don't know, I just thought it was like those numbers were crazy.
Yeah. I tend to, you know, in addition to being sort of, as you say, struck by how incredibly widespread this kind of issue is, you know, my brain instantly kind of jumps to, when I hear things like that, is, you know, what's going on here? You know, like she made the reference in the video. You can, you know, you can write the prescriptions for the antibiotics, or you can go to the well and see what's going on. You know, if clearly we have this problem. So my question after watching it, after I kind of recovered from my dejected stupor, was, okay, what do we do? You know, because, you know, if this is this thing that's as widespread as it is, and if it has this many, you know, negative effects, how can we address that issue? And she did a really nice job of laying out, you know, this is what we consider to be clinical best practices, things that involved, you know, home visits and care coordination and mental health services and nutritional services and medicational services. And that's all like awesome. But even with that, it feels like there's so much more, you know, that needs to happen. And when you sort of compound that in a practical sense for us as teachers, I came away honestly just feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the whole situation. It's like, wow, how am I supposed to get to anybody through that wall of just stuff? And that was sort of my initial reaction to it. I was like, just where do we go from here?
Yeah, no, that was one of the first things that kind of came to mind. I really liked her well analogy. That was like you mentioned. Definitely was like, we do have this problem. It's here. And as a second year teacher last year, my first year, me and Seth being in the same district, I don't know if you can speak to the same, depending on the level, but like just after building relationship with students last year, I had students that would just dump on me. It's like, holy crap, like that happened to you when you're 12 years old. That's never happened to me, and I'm 24. Like, what in the world? So I don't have a response to help them other than try to just help them kind of maneuver through that process a little bit of whatever's going on in the situation, and try to be that positive role model. And I think that's, like you're saying, like we're kind of stuck, like we're at our limit of like what we can do. Like the counselor side of things, you're doing everything to try to help cope with these kind of things that are going on in their lives, and we're kind of on a plateau almost. We're just stopping, and it's like we can only do so much, because at the end of the day, it's still almost like a domino effect. Like it's just trickling down slowly down throughout their life. And that's why always health concerns are coming up, or physical implications are happening later in life. And then the commonality of generational trauma that starts happening, which is frightening to see. I mean, from my perspective, it's like, okay, this 12-year-old, the odds of this 12-year-old getting out of this situation, out of Newton, Kansas, or out of the household trauma and still being successful and making good decisions is so much less than your kid that gets straight A's and doesn't have any of these worries, you know? I mean, I think it's one of those things that's always probably been a part of education, but it's just crazy being an educator now and kind of being in that role that you don't really know you're in the backseat. You don't really know what to do. You can't take the wheel, and you can't do a whole lot, it seems like, but I'm sure there's got to be other things. So,
Well, and I kind of thought about that too. Like, so as a school counselor, I wonder if I can pull up my slides here, because like I went and looked up like the ASCA, which is the American School Counselor Association, has like direct focuses on a lot of these things, and on supporting kids with trauma and social emotional learning and that sort of thing. And then like what I put into my presentation talked a lot about like multi-tiered system or systems of support. As like a school counselor, like we kind of can take that overarching view and, you know, like work at like tiered, like work within the tiered system of like, through classroom guidance lessons, we can go in and talk to kids about like safe relationships and things like that. And then from that, we can identify the kids that maybe need a little more like one-on-one attention or like group work to work through some of these things. And then, you know, the students that like you can tell are just really struggling with trauma, whether it's current or from the past, like those would be the kids that would have individual counseling, or we would be referring them out to other services, because counseling is not, it's not a long-term situation. Like most kids will meet with, you know, for a number of weeks, especially if it's in like a group setting, like we'll teach a lesson or a topic for a number of weeks. And past that, if students need more, we kind of have to refer them out. And I think it's kind of the same within the school, is like there has to be a lot of collaboration, because like as teachers, your responsibility is to teach lessons and get kids, you know, to where they need to be proficient in what you teach. But then when you have students that have these additional needs, you know, I think whenever I think about it, I just think of how hard that must be to try to balance like making sure the class as a whole is getting what they need, but also trying to give individual students, you know, what they need to be successful, but not just in their academics, because then you do have these other things, these outside factors that come in. And like you said, you kind of feel stuck, like, well, what can I do? And I think that's just a really unfortunate but realistic feeling, you know, of like, there's so much that goes into kids coming to school, and it isn't just them coming for academics. Like no matter what the system is set up to be, that's just not what it is. You know, kids are going to come with their experiences from home, and it's going to affect how they how they behave, how they are able to succeed. So in my like presentation, I talked a lot about just needing to have that collaboration of counselors and teachers both ways, like because counselors might not know everything that the teachers find out from the students or the families and vice versa. So I think that's a big key to being able to face these things with the students.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, it sounds selfish at first when I say it or when I think about it at least, but my way of kind of dealing with that stuckness of like, what can I do? It's everything's situational depending on the kid, obviously, but it's just what can I do to help this kid right now? And so a lot of times it's not academics. It's honestly forgiving them for not making them do the academics sometimes because emotionally or mentally they're not there that day, depending on what the situation is and what they're willing to tell me. And obviously you have to be able to recognize that before they're even willing to tell you half the time, because most of the time they won't unless they have that relationship with you. Some kids will come dumb, but just trying to find that balance as a teacher to figure out not only what legally you have to modify for the G guys and IEPs and everything, but also what do you have to modify on top of all of that just for social and emotional learning and adaptation with what's going on in their daily lives. So it's really crazy to kind of see and deal with all of that. And I think the collaboration is definitely important. And I think a lot of our counselors at my middle school, at least for our district, they do come in once a month, I think is what they try to do outside of their extra already duties they have. They try to come in like our seminar or SDL groups, try to come and present on topics like that at times. Do you find as a counselor, I don't know if you have experience, you might not be able to answer this, I guess, do you find it hard at the middle school level for the students to take it serious for those topics? Because I feel like as a teacher, I don't know if the counselors recognize, sometimes I'm like, these kids are not paying attention, they're not engaged. And it's not really the teacher or the counselor's fault, but they just think that they don't need to know it and they just zone out and don't really care. And then it's almost like not a waste of the counselor's time, but the kids are kind of wasting their time for them. So just,
Yeah, so what I'm focusing on right now when I'm at the middle school is actually doing groups. And so I've been able to go and kind of observe so far when the counselor that I'm working with has done SOS or signs of suicide training with the students. And then also they were doing like career planning stuff. And so the signs of suicide lesson, I think the students were paying attention, but they weren't very engaged. But I think part of that is like, that's a very heavy topic. And I think students can be afraid to speak on it, whether it's like personal to them or not. It just kind of seems like a taboo subject. But like for the career lesson, I mean, that we had a lot more like engagement from the students, and that was with 6th graders, I think. So I think it just kind of varies. And some of that also comes back to like the ability of the counselor to have like classroom management, like skills, because I think any level that you work with, there's going to be something that you kind of have to work through with some students. But I think that's kind of the nice thing about the tiered system too, is that like, there's always going to be something where we're trying to reach the masses, trying to reach the whole school, because that's part of our responsibility. And so through like classroom lessons, we can do that. But then a lot of times, we'll hand out like surveys and things at the end that are either anonymous or, like confidential. So students can then say like, it'll say something like, do you feel like you need to talk to a counselor about this topic? Check yes or no, write your name on it, and then we collect it. And so we did get some students that way through like the SOS training or lesson with them, where one of the sheets we gave them was to ask them to identify somebody in the school, a trusted adult, that they could name, and they didn't have to put their, like the students didn't have to put their name on that paper. They just had to write down like someone they trust, which I think is good for the school to know that like if there's like a lot of kids naming, you know, a certain teacher or something like that can be a resource then, you know. And then we gave them a second sheet of paper that was like, do you feel like you need to talk to the counselor about this topic, yes or no? And those the students did write their names on. And so we were able to identify a couple kids that like we could take that information then and either do like a small group with them about the topic or do individual counseling with them.
It's really interesting to me, Alyssa. Couple things actually. One, you were talking about the SOS discussions you were having, and you felt like the middle school kids were checking out a little bit during some of that presentation. I was actually having a discussion with one of my freshmen just the other day, and just kind of out of the blue, she said, you know, the suicide thing's a big deal. We need to talk about it more, which I was really intrigued by. And so I kind of, you know, I was just kind of asking questions, you know, so what makes you say that? What's, you know, is there anything going on? And, you know, she comes from one of these sort of, you know, trauma-filled households. And she's like, she recognizes that it's a big deal and a big problem. And she has friends who talk about this stuff amongst themselves. And she was relating the story of a conversation she'd had with another teacher prior to that. And the teacher kind of shut it down because she was getting uncomfortable. And I thought, wow, that's kind of the layers of sort of tragedy there, that there's this teacher who's not willing to go there and have the conversation with these kids who seem like they clearly need, you know, at least some kind of a sounding board, and then maybe, you know, direction to someone else if things, you know, if the conversation warrants it. But then also to have this kid, and she's a great kid, saying, I want more of this kind of discussion just across the board. And then Kobe, I think it's great that they're coming into the classrooms at the middle school. They might be doing something like that at our high school too, but I haven't heard about it, which is sort of, again, kind of an enlightening moment to me, you know, to hear that they're doing it at this level, and then it kind of seems to peter out once they get to high school level, for whatever reason. So that's kind of interesting to me. I'd also like to throw in that my position is such that I travel between schools a lot. So I get to see the high school kind of reactions to things, and also the early middle school age of things, because I work at our 5th and 6th grade center. And there I know they're doing some really good intervention too. So I do wonder what happens, and it might just be that I don't see it because I'm not, you know, because I'm bouncing around as much as I am. But it's interesting that it seems, from my perspective, to be something that administratively fades a little bit at the high school. And again, I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, so in my district, the students start SOS training in 6th grade. And so they'll do it 6th, 7th, and 8th. But I think this is a new initiative. So like, we just did SOS training with seniors in their history classes, but it's because they had never had any SOS training. They were the only group that had not had it yet. So from whenever it started and it was being like trickled in and implemented, they were the last group. So we did it with them a couple weeks ago. But I don't know that there's a plan to like refresh, you know, freshmen, sophomores, juniors, at least not that I've heard. Granted, right now is crunch time for getting seniors like ready for applying for colleges and stuff. So maybe that's something that will come in, you know, the spring. One thing that the district did do is on the back of all of our students' ID cards, they actually printed like I think like the acronyms for like SOS and like what's involved in that, that like program, that lesson, and also then like suicide hotline numbers and that sort of thing. So I think that's probably the idea, was to kind of like still have something there, like a resource for students if we're not able to do the lessons. But then the problem with that too is I don't know that the students were ever told that it's there. So there's that additional piece of like, we need to be telling them.
Right. It's at some point it's a communication issue too,
Mhm.
right? It's clearly the students are aware of a lot of these things.
Mhm.
But how are we then communicating the next steps that they could take?
Mhm.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, sorry. Something that comes to mind, Seth, that you kind of mentioned. You said you're not aware if it's happening at Newton High School or not. I know one of our counselors that she was new last year. She came up to the high school this year, Jamie Moses. And I think her role is actually with seniors right now, but I think she was part of the spark to start some of those intervention groups, and coming into the classrooms once a month kind of thing, and
Oh,
educating.
great. Yeah, good.
So I think hopefully on the positive note that she's kind of going to be doing some of that at the high school. But, and this is, I don't know how to say this without, I don't want to offend anyone or step on toes or anything, but like, I think there's a common mindset with older kids. They're stuck in their habits. They're going to do what they're going to do no matter what. And they either know or they don't know, and they don't care to know. So it's kind of like one of those things that they're stuck in their habits already at that point. So and that sounds really horrible, because it's like, okay, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't educate them on these topics, obviously, because they still need them, obviously, at that level. But I feel like there's some type of mindset that they're stuck in their habits. We're trying to change it from that fifth grade, sixth grade year into those middle school years. So then hopefully by then, when they're in high school, it's like, okay, they already heard all this stuff before. They know where to reach out to. They know how to cope with all this stuff a little bit better. And then as they get to high school, then it's like they can actually apply it right away. Hoping that you beat them to the trauma that I guess is happening, which isn't really a true concept, I wouldn't say. But the fact that I think the mindset, and maybe you guys agree or disagree, I don't know, but there is that, I feel like there's that mindset that they're stuck in their ways at that high school level already with the way they go about life. So then it's a lot easier to break it before they get stuck in their ways after middle school. I don't know if you guys agree with that or not. Maybe
I
that's
think
why.
I think there are definitely people with that mindset. I think from my experience, like in practicum, there are more opportunities to do classroom lessons in middle school than there are in high school, just because of all like the vast number of classes in high school compared to middle school. And the volume of students per counselor, like there's just, it's not as easy to get into classrooms to do different like large group lessons in high school, at least from what I'm seeing. That's my perspective, I guess. And a lot of time thus far that I'm seeing also is like a lot of time is spent like with individual students. Like right now, I'm meeting with students that are at academic risk. So like we just passed our 9-week mark. And so I'm meeting with the students that are like failing to be like, okay, let's see what we can do for these next 9 weeks to make sure you pass your courses so that you don't have to do summer school or, you know, whatever. So I think that might be kind of like you said, trying to, you know, like beat the experiences that the kids might have, because like middle school is a very critical time, you know, like socially and emotionally. And so being able to get them the SOS training, because they do it 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So they'll review it all through middle school. I think it's only once a year that they do it, but at least, you know, they are getting that. So I think the idea is kind of like once they do get to high school, like if we keep printing it on the, you know, on the back of their IDs, if we do better about telling them it's there, you know, I think maybe it's kind of that idea of like, all right, they've had the training, we can touch base on that or try to find the kids that haven't had it, but then like try to be aware of individually who's in need so that we can meet with them. Because like right now, to pull in students, even just to see them for a counseling session for whatever it is, senior meetings or whatever, you're basically trying to find them during their like guided personal study time or their pride time. And like pride time on Mondays is Mindset Mondays. So that's when they do their social emotional learning lessons like in their pride. So the whole school does it. So that is one time where we're like, okay, we're going to talk about important things, you know, so like social emotional learning with the kids on Mondays. So they're like not allowed to pass to other teachers for academics or whatever during that time. But otherwise it's tricky to get kids in.
For sure. Yeah. Which, and again, it makes sense that it works that way at these bigger, you know, at this higher level where it's, you know, more kids, fewer people, fewer counselors, fewer, you know, it makes logistical sense that it would be a problem, but it's still a problem.
Yeah. Well, I agree 100%.
Yeah.
I think that's the good argument then too, of like, we need to be funding for more staff. We need to be funding to have the resources available to the kids to make sure that like we are helping them in all of these critical areas of social, emotional, academic, career readiness, like everything, you know. Yeah. And unfortunately, that's just not the case yet.
Which is, you know, one of the great frustrations, I think, of public education. The money part is always a trick. But no, I'm also a little curious, Alyssa. You were mentioning that, you know, you're doing the academic counseling right now to move those grades along. You know, what's the plan? And absolutely cool. And I don't know what your population's like, or if it ever even comes up. But does this trauma side of things ever figure into that? And if it does, how do you address it as again a way of dealing with the well rather than writing the prescription for antibiotics?
Yeah, absolutely. So the school counselor I work with, who's my site supervisor, is amazing, and she actually was the one that recommended that I start focusing on academics with students, because she said like that is kind of the gateway of getting into more social, emotional, personal stuff. Because like one of the biggest keys of being a counselor is building a relationship with the kids and building that trust so that they can share these heavier, more difficult things that are affecting their life as a whole. And something that I focus on a lot in like all of my classes, and I think I've written about it in every single assignment we've had for this class so far, is like, it's so important to see kids as a whole. I think in a school setting, you know, we can get kind of like horse blinders and just like want to focus on the academics, but like kids they don't walk into the building forgetting about what happens outside of school. They bring all that in with them. And so while I'm meeting with kids, you know, and right now it's starting with academics, like, excuse me, oftentimes, you know, if I see with their academics, like they're failing these classes and they're also tardy, excuse me, they've also been absent or tardy 65 times in 9 weeks. All right, that's a good segue into like what's going on outside of school. Do you have transportation issues? Like, what's going on there? I'm so sorry.
Don't be, just breathe.
Got like a tickle in my throat at the worst time. So yeah, I think like that has been a nice thing, because I'm able to build a relationship with the kids and start to kind of like show them how all of these things tie together, because I don't know that they even necessarily see how like what goes on at home affects how they behave at school, affects how they feel about their future. Like, you know, it's all intertwined. And so yeah, and I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it's again, it's just with this whole topic, everything is just sort of a wash and then spins around and then maybe comes out later is sort of how I feel like it's going to go. But yeah, and then to comment a little on your earlier point, Kobe, it's I agree. I think that there is kind of this mentality of once they're in high school, they're sort of locked in, which again is frustrating and tragic, because I've seen, you know, I had freshmen last year who are totally different people than they were. I have seniors this year who were totally different people last year as juniors. So it's it raises my hackles just a little bit to think that there are people who imagine that they're stuck, because there's so much room for change.
It's a very toxic viewpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like-
no, I agree. I just want to say I do not agree with the viewpoint that is not.
Oh no, and I didn't interpret it that way.
You weren't accused of that. I want to make sure
It's a
that
good
was
thing
like-
to bring up, because I mean, it's just one more barrier to like to being able to help kids through this. You know, if they're being told by anyone, let alone like another teacher or something, that like nothing's gonna change for you, you don't have any hope, like they're not gonna change. You know, like so much of middle school and high school is like having people support you and feeling like people care. And so if you get the feeling that people don't, like why try? You know, why try to be anything other than what people see you as?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the coolest things, we have about 4 minutes left of recording time, just a heads up. We can go into another one if we need to, but one of the coolest things with that kind of topic that we bring up, Alyssa, is we see the change that needs to be there, and we have all these barriers and stuff. The cool thing to me is, and I guess I'm part of that generation a little bit. I don't consider that myself is, I don't know how to explain that, but I'm part of that younger generation right now. I'm just turned 24. But a lot of even my students, as 7th graders last year, they're 8th graders this year. They showed a lot of signs of like being willing to talk about these kind of things. They dump on, like students dump on me all the time about certain things that are going on. One of the coolest experiences, the most eye-opening experiences, was last year in what was our SDL. It's like our seminar time. I had like an hour and a half every day. I have what the counselors would consider heavy hitters. In that group, I had 13 kids, and 10 of them saw the counselor every other day at least, because of trauma, death in the families, all throughout last year, all kinds of things. And they, at one point, there was some time in the semester, I don't remember when it was, or in the year, at one point, like 4 or 5 of them kind of just started having a conversation, and in the corner, and I kind of overheard a little bit, and they're like, "Mr. Dixon, don't mind us. We're not doing homework right now," because they're supposed to be doing homework at that time. Like, we're not doing homework right now. We're actually taking a break, and we're having a trauma dump. And that's what they called it. And I was like, "What's that?" And they're like, "We're just talking about all the trauma we went through." And I was like, "I'm not stopping that." I was like, "That sounds cool. You mind if I sit in?" And we sat there and I just listened. And it's just crazy to hear that these kids are so open and willing to talk about it to their peers, let alone with me sitting there. But it was just a very eye-opening thing to me, because it's this new generation is coming up, and they're willing to change. They see these problems because of social media and all this stuff. I think the faster communication is helping them see it at an earlier age. They see that there's those barriers, and they're trying to knock them down. I think. Now maybe they don't do it in the right way all the time, but that was our right way at that time. It was the right way. It was awesome.
No, I think that's great, and it shows how important like their peer relationships are. And that's why I think like for things like this, like social emotional learning and trauma, like depending on what it is and if it's regulated correctly, like having groups of students that have similar trauma can be really effective, you know, like so having groups for students that have parents that are going through a divorce currently, like that is tough for students. So if they can have a trauma dump with other kids that are going through it, I think that's a great resource for them, because they have other people that they can relate to, so they don't feel alone in what they're going through. So I think that's great.
Yeah, no, it was awesome to see. And like one kid that wasn't one of the heavy hitters doesn't really go through as much trauma, more on the higher end of like so the hierarchy of like social economical status. And they just kind of sat in and was like, "Wow, I didn't know you guys went through this." It was very eye-opening for them. So everyone in the whole classroom was learning. It was awesome. It was a great experience.
For sure. Do you guys feel like you want to continue on into another video, or Do you feel like we hit most of the things we needed to?
I feel like I hit what I had to say particularly, and
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
We can call it a night. Thank you so much, guys.
That's
Great.
fair.
Thank you guys.
Thanks,
Have a good night.
guys.
Have a good
Bye.
night.